she fiercely defended that identity and was extremely proud of it. Her black grandfather said, if anything gets bad in this country racially, you should try to pass. She said, I would never do that. I'm proud of my race. And so she decides that she's going to do a DNA test, and she buys one for herself and one for her black father because she wants to go back to Africa and trace their roots. So she takes the test. Yeah, she's half white, but the other half is not African. It's Ashkenazi Jew.
Hello, welcome back to Lost and Found No More Secrets. My name is Heidi Kuiper, and I am the host of the show. I am joined today by Laura Olmsted. She is the founder and executive director of DNAngels. Hello, welcome. Hello, Laura. Welcome to the show.
You have to forgive us. We've got the giggles, I think, today.
Me too.
Thanks for having me. It's a really special day. I'm excited to be here for this interview.
And this is something different than what we're normally doing. We're going to be interviewing Gail, who is an author with some really great insight. I think that all of our viewers are really going to enjoy listening to her talk about her different books and stories that basically come through these books.
Yes. So Gail wrote What They Never Told Us, and it kind of delves into the family secrets and hidden identities revealed through the lens of like personal experiences of different people in our community. And I think she did such an incredible job at writing the stories of people in our community. And she didn't speak for them. She interviewed them and she shared their story in their own words.
Important. What do you say we go ahead and bring up Gail to the show?
Let's do it.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
We feel so honored to have you on our show today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're absolutely welcome. What inspired you to write What They Never Told Us, and how did your own experience shape the book's narrative? That's my first question to you.
Okay. I never intended to write What They Never Told Us. What happened was I wrote White Like Her, my family story of race and racial passing. And as a result of writing that book, I was on the Today Show. And after I was on the Today Show, I'm not exaggerating, I received an avalanche of emails from around the world, not just the US, Africa, Europe, Canada, everywhere. And everyone was writing me to tell me their own family secret. And usually the email would start something like this. Well, I've never, ever told anyone this, but I want to tell you. So this went on for quite a number of years, a lot of people writing to me. I mean, I'm not getting as much now, but every once in a while I still get someone writing me about their family secret. So I started thinking, well, maybe instead of the next book being mystery or something like that, I'm going to write about other people's secrets. And so that was my inspiration to write What They Never Told Us.
Let's go a little bit into your background, the first book. I want to know more about what inspired you to write the first book.
White Like Her?
White Like Us.
Mm-hmm. White Like Her, yeah. All right. I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going back. In 1995, I was between teaching jobs. And I thought, I'm going to do some research into my maternal grandfather, Azima Frederick. He's from Louisiana, New Orleans, my mother's father. Now, you got to remember, it's 1995, right? So there's no Ancestry. There's no, very little internet. So I had to research the old-fashioned way. I went to my local family history center and started going through census records. And it was very difficult finding Azima because my mother somehow didn't know when he was born. She didn't know when he died. So I just kept going through the census records. And eventually I found the 1900 Louisiana census records, and that's where I found Azima. And he was, I think, 2 or 3 years old. And I was looking at him and all the Fredericks were all living in the same house. And after all their names was the letter B. I thought, oh, what does that mean? So I traced that up to the column and it said race. So I sat there and I went, wait a minute, does that mean black? So I went and asked the woman who was helping us with the microfilm. And I said, I found my grandfather. I told her about the B. And I said, does that mean black? And she says, oh, yes, that's what it means. And then she launched into this, I couldn't believe it, these racial slurs, talking a lot about this certain kind of candy, which I never heard about, but it started with the N word, N candies. So I just stood there sort of petrified, listening. And I didn't know what she was talking about. And then she ended by saying, aren't you the one with all the slaves in your family? I knew nothing about any of this. So I got out of there pretty quickly. It was January. I live in Chicago area, so it was cold. Got in my car. I sat there and I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and I said, who are you? What just happened? What does this mean? What is this about? When I walked into that center, I was a white woman. When I left, I didn't know what I was. So that was the impetus for White Like Her. And that was 1995. And I wanted to talk to my mom about it because that was the person I should go to. However, my father became very ill. It was a long illness. So I waited. I'm from Ohio, the Cleveland area. My mom lived there and I live in the Chicago area. So I waited till after my dad passed, invited my mother to visit. And that's when I asked her about it. Now during those 2 years, I also wrote to the state of Louisiana as if I was my mother and told them I lost my birth certificate. And so they sent me her birth certificate. And on her birth certificate for race, they had 3 letters, COL, which I assume meant colored. Wrote another letter, asked them what that meant. And yes, they confirmed it meant colored. So when my mom came to visit, I asked her about all this. At first, she denied it. She said something like, I don't know what birth certificate you have, but mine says I'm white. Then I said, well, Mom, I'll get you the rest of the documents I have. And then she got very quiet and finally said, you can never tell anyone until after I die. And I said, can I tell my brother? I have one sibling. She said, you cannot even tell him.
Wow.
So my mom lived to 92. I kept her secret for 17 years. It was a long time to keep a secret. The only people I told my husband and I told my 2 children. And then I told a very good friend, and that was it. So I was a secret keeper.
That's
I
a
was
lot
just
of
going to
weight to
say
carry.
that.
What's that?
That's a lot of weight to carry.
It was. It's a funny thing about life goes on, right? 17 years. It's not that I forgot about it. It just wasn't always front and center. And so during that 17 years, Ancestry did come out. And I did my own research on my grandfather and his family, the Frederick family. I found I had a Civil War hero who was part of what they called the colored troops on the Union side, Leon Frederick, very proud of him. So and I tried to tell my mom about this. I would call her. We talked once a week. I said, Mom, I found Leon Frederick. Here's what she said to me. So how are the kids? She did not want to talk about it at all. So what happened, she passed in 2014. 3 months later, Genealogy Roadshow put out a notice that anyone who had family secrets about the New Orleans area to contact them. I did. And then I ended up being on the show. And that started my journey. They said everything I thought was correct. My mother was passing as white. She had been designated in the 1940 census as Negro. And then, of course, she married my white dad, she actually married in Ohio. You could not marry in the South if you were of a different race. So she married my white dad in Ohio. And in the 1950 census, she's listed as white. So she changed her racial identity.
And you've taken genetic testing since then?
I did. I've been tested twice. It depends on which test you're looking at. It's 7 to 9% African heritage and 2% Native American.
Right, because her grandpa was black. So if her mother were to take the test, Mom would have been well, we would say 50%, but we know that even Black people are not 100% Black because they already have mixed ethnicity as well. So her mom would
Correct.
have been above the 25%
Well,
percent.
in the book, White Like Her, I trace the Frederick family all the way back to the 1700s, the
Mhm.
colonial Louisiana, and that's where I discovered an enslaved woman by the name of Marta. And she has 13 children with a white man. Her
Right,
enslaver, though he does free her after, I think it was the fourth child. So there's the start of the white blood.
right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I know I was able to talk to one of my mother's living relatives who's in her generation, a cousin, a first cousin, and she did get tested, and she told me she was 13% African
Oh,
heritage. So I'm thinking somewhere in there, maybe.
Right.
Not sure.
Yeah.
You guys
Well,
would
let's bring it back to the book that you wrote, which is what we want to talk about. But honestly, I could listen to stories about White Like Her all day because I told you backstage that it's in my book library, and I love that book. But let's bring it back to the book about family secrets.
yes, what they
That
never
you
told
wrote.
us. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So your book starts off with a little bit of background about White Like Her, and then it goes right into the Salmon King. And we all know who the Salmon King's daughter is, which is Carla Rubenstein Diane, who's a very good friend of ours. Let's talk about that.
Her story is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I wanted to get the right hook with her story. And I open her section with she always carried around with her as a child a picture of her Black father
Yeah.
because people didn't believe her when she said she was biracial, and she would show them the picture. And so she grew up thinking she was biracial. What I love about her story is how fiercely she fought for her biracial identity.
Right.
She tells a story about being in grammar school and a girl asking her, Are you half Black? Are you biracial?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And then the girl slapped her in the face.
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty shocking. So she fiercely defended that identity and was extremely proud of it. Her black grandfather said, if anything gets bad in this country racially, you should try to pass. She said, "I would never do that. I'm proud of my race." And so she decides that she's going to do a DNA test, and she buys one for herself and one for her Black father because she wants to go back to Africa and trace their roots. So she takes the test. Yeah, she's half white, but the other half is not African. It's Ashkenazi Jew. She has no African heritage at all. So that sends her on a journey to find out who her biological father is or was. And that's where she finds out. And Laura, you're more an expert on all what she had to do genetically. But what she discovers, she finds him, and he's deceased. He's Sam Rubenstein, the Salmon King of Seattle, a very wealthy, prominent man. And so she goes to the family. She meets, I think, a cousin, but the family rejects her. And that's, to me, so sad. She told me they thought I was after their money. I wasn't after their money. I was after medical history. I want to know for me and my children, what is my medical history? So I'm not going to go into details of how they finally settled it legally, but it's in the book. It's very interesting. But she owns the rights to her story. She owns the rights to her story. She's able to tell it wherever she wants. And so that's why I was able to tell her story.
And a little bit, she also was able to change her name.
She did. She
Yeah.
legally changed her name,
Yes.
Rubenstein. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
And wasn't her nickname Sam growing up?
Yes.
Oh,
And
I didn't know
turned out
that
to be,
part. She didn't
yeah.
tell me that.
Yes, her nickname was Sam growing up, and that's no part of her name at all.
Oh,
Her first, middle, or last name did not have Sam in it. Sam, she just recently put that out.
I didn't know
So I'm
that.
sure you saw that in one of the communities.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about. I'm sorry, this is your show, Heidi, but
No,
we have to talk about Bruce because we are in your book, and I
You
was just
are.
thrilled by that. Bruce was my very first client ever as a genetic genealogist search angel when I was just starting to help people. I was assigned his case by another group that I worked with before I became the founder of DNAngels, and it took me 3 years to solve his case. It was so hard. Nobody's tree was right. Nobody wanted to talk. Um, so let's talk about Bruce.
Yes. Bruce's story, I really connected with his story. Not that I didn't connect with the others, but because of the racial element, I really connected with Bruce's story. Bruce said to me, he said, growing up, I always felt that I didn't quite belong with my family because I didn't look like them.
Right.
He's from a very large Irish Catholic family, 9 siblings,
Yep.
and all of them are blue-eyed and fair-skinned. And he said, not me. I had very dark eyes, very dark curly hair, and I tanned really easily in the summers. So he said when I was a kid in school, kids would say things like, where'd you get that hair? Where'd you come from? And his dad said to him, just tell him, your hair came with your head. But then when he got a little older in school, the questions became more like taunts. So he was called like Black Sambo, half breed, sometimes the N word. And his parents, every time he went to his parents, they insisted that it was a recessive gene that was accounting for his appearance. So this affected him not only as a child, but as he became an adult.
Yeah.
Dating was difficult. He told me that he was engaged to be married at one point, and the woman broke it off because of this uncertainty about his heritage. She didn't feel comfortable. He never had any children. And I think he married 47. He was 47. So he decided he was going to settle all this after his parents were deceased. He took DNA test. I think it was in 2014. And he said, when I spit in that tube, I was going to go wherever that journey took me. And it was no surprise to him when he got the results. Am I right, Laura?
Yep.
I think he said it was something like 37%.
37%.
Yeah, African heritage.
Sub-Saharan. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess this is when he reached out to you to find his biological father. And so, yeah, he said to me, yeah, Laura found out and we found out who he was, but it didn't give me a lot of comfort, is what he said. And when he actually, on the videotape, when he talked or described to me about his biological father, it became very clipped and short. Black laborer, Texas, very little education. I mean, he said it exactly like that.
Very judgmental. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, and then he, as you know, goes in search of the paternal side and did end up cutting the story a little short here because it does go on, but he ends up finding a half sister and they share a father. And in the book, I call her Rosa. We had to change some names, but, and he met her. And what's so great, and I talk about this a lot with these stories, is genetic mirroring. He said, the first time I saw her, I could see in her eyes, we shared the same eyes. And that he said, that's the first time in my life I felt that genetic mirroring. And that's so important for us, right? For our identities, to find people that look like us. I mean, I say this all the time. When a baby's born, what's the first thing we do? We look to see, who do they look like in the family, right?
Yes,
this is how we, form our tribes and identify with each other. So many people in the book didn't have that until they found a member of their biological family, which is extremely moving. Yeah, his story is great. And I said to Bruce at the end of the interview, I'm offering everyone the option to not use their real name. He was so adamant. I want my name used. I want my story out there. I want to help other people.
He does.
Yeah.
He does.
Very
I think one of the most beautiful things about his story was the relationship with his sister, his new sister. And I
Yes.
have to say that when we found his sister, she did not know that her dad wasn't her dad either.
Yes.
I had to tell her that your dad is this man because I had just identified the biological father months
Oh,
before. She was a new match after I had already solved the case. And
oh,
so
wow.
I had to take on the task of saying, the man that raised you isn't your biological father. It's this man right here.
Oh,
Mhm.
Bruce said she
She
cried.
yeah, I want to say she handled it well,
Yeah,
but I'm so glad that she had Bruce to fall back on because he is really a lovely man. He
he
really,
is.
really is.
He's a great guy. Great
Yes.
guy.
What other is there any other stories in your book that really come to your mind that you want to share?
Yeah, there are several. One story I'm going to share is Jane's story. And she is the only person in the book that I didn't seek out. She sought me. So she contacted me in a private message through Facebook. And she said to me, I read White Like Her. I'm aware of your story. Did you ever think about telling us the story of the people who are left behind by the passer, the person who passes for white? And she said, if you're interested, I will tell you my story. And then she says something like, one day my sister and her husband decided to be white. And then she included a little photograph of her sister and her sitting together with three of their children. And after her sister decided, she actually decided one Christmas Eve that she was going to be white, told Jane, you can't come over for Christmas this evening. Um, my husband's having his white employees over. That was the last time she saw her sister until her mother was dying in the hospital.
Mhm.
Her sister cut her out of her life totally, didn't see the kids, nothing. So it was a very tragic story to me. Um, yeah, that's what passing does. That's what passing does. And I think to this day, her sister's deceased, but I think her children and grandchildren don't know that they're mixed race. They're not aware. So I had to make sure I was careful with names and protecting Jane and everyone else involved in that story. The other story, and this one's gotten, I think, a lot of press, more press than any other story in the book, is Brad Yule's story.
Yep.
And he was a Texas cop. He literally just retired. And he didn't know he was even adopted. He and his wife decided, and this is how, right? This is how this happens. What a fun thing to do at Christmas. Let's give each other DNA tests and see where that goes. So, yeah, they did. He wasn't contacted right away, but they posted their results. So, about, I think a few years later, a woman contacted Brad and said, I think you're my lost nephew. He had no idea who this woman was. It would have been on the maternal side. And that's when he finds, what he does next is he digs out his birth certificate and his wife's birth certificate. They were both born in Texas in 1970. He compares them and he says to me, they couldn't have been more different.
Mhm.
Where she had a hospital name, he had a dash. Where her father had signed the birth certificate, his father's name was typed. So that was his first clue that something was up. And he ends up going to a woman who was adopted that he knew from his church. And he spoke with her and sent his birth certificate to her. She calls him back and says, yeah, this is what an adoptee's birth certificate looked like in 1970s Texas. So he didn't even know he was adopted. He called his father, and his father said, after a lot of hemming and hawing, we've been trying to tell you this for 48 years. And
Mhm.
Bruce said, Brad said, you've been trying to tell me for 48 years? Come on. He feels they never would have told him. So he also goes in search of his biological parents. He finds out that his biological father is still alive. But here's the shocker. He's serving a life sentence for murder an Angola prison, which is a notorious prison in Louisiana. So, he's a cop. His biological father's a murderer. So he said, I wasn't going to meet him. I've dealt with criminals my whole life. I know what he's going to say. I didn't do it. It wasn't my fault, blah, blah, blah. He said, and the more I thought about it, I thought, I have to meet him. I have to meet him. So he did arrange to meet him in prison. And it was not what he expected. One of the first things his biological father said to him was, yeah, I did it. And I belong to be here. I should be here for this. So their relationship grew. He visited him quite a bit in prison, learned more about him. He found out that his father's name, biological father's name, is Jimmy Graves, and that he didn't commit murder. However, when he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And he'd already been in prison 50 years. So during that 50-year period, the state of Louisiana changed it without his consent and made it life in prison without the possibility of parole. So Brad did something some people might not agree with. He went to bat for his father, his biological father, met with the state committee and petitioned that he be released. And he was released in 2022. And he lives close to Brad and his family. And they now have a pretty darn good relationship. I actually interviewed Jimmy Graves. It was amazing to talk to him. It really was.
Fascinating.
Isn't that wild?
It is the wildest story.
I met Brad at Untangling Your Roots a few years ago and heard his story, and I was just fascinated.
Yeah.
Did you know Gail was there too?
No, I didn't know that.
She describes in her book
Yeah.
that she was at Untangling Our Roots and looked over and saw the
Your
book
booth.
DNAngels.
Yes, don't give it away. I'm going to read it.
Oh, well, let's do that now.
Well, okay.
I'm going to read it.
Let's go into that.
I'm going to read this. This is, I need to kind of set it up. This is the last chapter. It's a short excerpt. And the chapter is called Strangers Keep Telling Me Their Secrets, which is true. So I'm relating an incident that actually happened at Untangling Our Roots a few years ago. And I'm sitting at my author table, and I've been signing books and for a few hours. And so I'm getting ready to pack up. It's the first day of the summit. And this is what happens. Suddenly, as I'm packing up, a woman is standing in front of my table. Maybe in her mid-30s, though I'm a terrible judge of age. Brown hair, casually dressed, there's an edge to her. Her lanyard is twisted, so I can't see her name or what state she's from. You're the reason I came, she says emphatically. I wasn't going to come, but I saw your name. I drove here from central Illinois. From the intensity of her gaze, the way she leans in, her hand resting on one of my books, I sense she desperately wants to tell me something. I'm both pleased but wary. My mother's story sometimes elicits unexpected emotional reactions from people. The woman's gaze drifts away toward the DNAngels booth as she gathers her thoughts. I wait. Then she looks at me and begins to tell me her story. 2 weeks ago, I got my DNA results. Shocker. My dad's not my dad. I asked my mom about it. At first, she wouldn't tell me. Then she did. It happened while she was separated from my dad. She had an affair with this guy she knew. She thought she couldn't get pregnant. I guess she was wrong. I'm just glad my dad's no longer here. Do you know who your birth father is? I asked. After almost 2 years of interviewing people who've had these parental discoveries, the question comes easily. She scoffs. It's a small town. I know who he is. As soon as I found out, I marched over to his house. I knocked on his door and told him I was his daughter. He told me to leave and not come back. End of story. Her mouth is tight with anger and hurt. I'm sorry, I say. Of all the people's stories of parental discoveries I've listened to, none of them were so recent and so raw. Look, I'm a businesswoman. I run my own travel agency. People work for me. I can handle this. She pauses. I'm not sure if I'm going to stay. I just want to meet you. You might want to stick around and check out some of the panels, I offer, believing that the panels might help her. I don't know. Thanks anyway. It's the second day of the summit, late in the afternoon. There's a line of people waiting to buy my book, probably because they attended my author panel. The line starts to dwindle. I look up after signing a copy of my book and see the woman from yesterday. She waits until everyone leaves. I thought I could handle this, but I can't. She starts to cry. I hold her hand while she cries. There's nothing else I can do except to say, it's good that you stayed. From my own discovery experience and from listening to others with similar experiences, I know the difficult journey that lies ahead for her as she begins putting the pieces of her identity back together. As I hand her my card, I tell her to email me via my website if she wants to talk. I never hear from her again. When I think about the stories in this book and the bravery of the people sharing them, I think about what the novelist Sigrid Nunez said at the end of her novel, The Friend. What we miss, what we lost, and what we mourn, isn't this what makes us who deep down we truly are? From these splintered pieces of who we once thought we were, we heal and forge our new selves.
It's beautiful. Truly inspiring.
From someone who experienced a DNA surprise, it really hits home what she was feeling. Like she was raw, she was new.
It
You're
was.
still in the throes of it. So she's just having that moment of, I'm tough, I can do this, it's no big deal. Nothing's gonna get me. And then she gives herself a moment of grace to see what others are experiencing, and she stayed. And so she was able to get more out of it than what she intended. So
It
I'm really
was such an emotional experience for her and actually for me too. When she came back the second day and I held her hand and I let her cry,
yeah.
it was like it just poured into me what I would I've been doing and what I'm doing and how glad I was that she stayed. She needed to stay. She needed to, and I wish she had written me, but that's okay. She got what she needed. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. And sometimes there's just no words, just you holding her hand
There were
is
no
what
words.
she needed at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had seen her the first day, she was, oh, so strong.
Yeah.
This brave front. And then the second day, it was all gone. She just kind of, oh, yeah.
Well, in conclusion, looking back on your own journey and the stories you've shared, what advice would you give to someone who has just discovered a life-altering family secret?
My best advice is, first of all, take a deep breath. Then seek help. Go to the resources that are out there. I would start with Kara's website, Right to Know, meaning right to know your genetic identity. She has a lot of resources there. And she also, I mean, if you want, she has a phone number. You can talk to someone. And
We do too.
yeah, I think I would start there. And I would say, be kind to yourself. And I also would say this, it's a shock if your parents are still living, and I would also be kind to them to try to understand. That's what I try to do in the book, is to understand where they're coming from as well, because many of these secrets, these decisions to keep them were made in a different time
Right.
period than what we're living now. In the 20th century, where the social mores were different, and there was a lot of shame involved
Right.
with secrets. So I would say, give yourself a break, try and understand.
Excellent advice. Excellent. Well, Gail, Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and be on our show. Is there anything else before we say goodbye that you'd like to say?
It's just been a pleasure being on the show and being able to tell these stories. And I'm so grateful to the work you're doing, Laura. It's just wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for coming.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Why I always get so choked up? I don't understand it. It just always hits me so personally. And I had read White Like Her, and of course I read her new book. Why do I keep forgetting the name of this book? Hang on, I want to say it because I know it. It's in
What
my
they,
book.
what they never told us?
Yes. I messed it up a minute ago too. I was like, what's the name of her book? What they never told us. And it's really all about the secrets, right? But it is that final story that she chose to read out loud that
Mm-hmm.
really got me. Even though I
Well,
knew
you
Bruce's
were
story,
there. You were there.
yes,
I mean,
yes, it, it really got me. So I wish more people understood our community.
right.
You know, I wish that they should invite her on Good Morning America, um, or another national TV show so that we can start the conversation, because you can't start the healing until you start the conversation, right? You
Right.
have to acknowledge that there is an issue out there.
Mhm.
And those of us taking consumer DNA tests are not expecting to find out that we have different parents or a different father or a different grandfather. And it's not a little thing, it's a big deal.
Right.
So let's just keep talking about it, Heidi. We're not going to shut up. We're going to keep talking about it.
Right. I've actually, but her last, one of the last things she said is talking about the. I'm trying very hard in my cases to give grace to the moms and the dads. You don't know where they were at that time in their life, generational differences, times have changed. And I'm really trying to be very intentional about that, but
Good.
also allow my client to experience the feelings that they have every right to be experiencing. So I'm glad that she did mention that.
So listen, if you support Gail, you appreciate her books, we want you to put a green heart as a comment, just to acknowledge that you heard that you watched the show, that you appreciate that Gail took this project on. We need a green heart, because green is actually the color for NPE awareness. And she talks about late discovery adoptees. She talks about not parent expected. She talks about donor conceived. But since I'm an NPE, I'm going to ask for a green heart in the
I
comments.
love it. Yes, please do that. I'm sure Gail will be reading the comments, and if you have any questions for her, leave a comment, and I'm sure she'll be reading it and be able to get back with you. Well, I think this is going to conclude this episode. Thank y'all so much for coming to watch. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and give us a like. You can also share. We appreciate your time. We'll see you next Thursday. Goodbye.
Thanks, Heidi. Have a good day.
Thank you, Laura.